The Wild Beanman is at it again. Today, Bradley Hall released a video talking about Opeth, and as per usual, I have far too many opinions. So let's see what the Wild Beanman has to say about my beloved Opeth.
Unique, original band that have accomplished the very rare feat of staying relatively fresh and creative throughout the entirety of their whole career.
I would also agree with that, obviously. Like, setting aside metal bands or prog bands, it's very rare you see that out of any artist, so that is absolutely worthy of note and commendation.
Finds the art of sounding like themselves without sounding like self-parody. They blend several styles of music that you would never ever think that would like mash together. Death metal, 70s, prog rock, like folk music,
and jazz.
Orchard. You got sort of like that trippety groove that's very Opeth-y. You've got like these harmonized octave things going on. It's so far away. I'm far away.
Yeah, the whispery spoken word stuff I always thought was so cringe.
I'm not really a fan of their first three albums. They're like really, really amateur and ropey. It's just like, doesn't really go anywhere. It's just kind of boring.
Yes, completely yes. And on top of all of that, the production is total ass. There are people who try to stand these albums. They are objectively wrong. Ask Opeth themselves. They are also embarrassed by these first three albums. And don't get me wrong, you got to start somewhere, and I'm proud of them for doing that and then growing from it and becoming just absolutely insanely awesome. But it's okay to admit that you like crap. Everyone has a flavor of crap that they enjoy consuming. And if this is yours, that's great. I'm happy for you. It's still crap. So we can just skip through the first three albums because Bradley nails that pretty much. Let's go to Still Life here.
It's very cool melodic sound, melancholic, you know, aesthetic and vibe and lyrics, with this sort of like, everything's like steeped in lots of reverb.
It does have a lot of reverb, and it kind of falls into similar problems that I think 80s stuff does, to where it kind of dates it with a relatively thin, bright, almost a little bit harsh sounding production mixed with reverb can be a little bit little tinny. And I would not describe Still Life as inherently tinny, but it definitely does not have the body and depth that later Opeth albums would have. A bit on the piercing your ear side.
Listen to how well that acoustic is recorded. It sounds like it's right there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's getting a, proper setup with fresh strings. It's getting a great performance. It's putting a proper mic, doesn't have to even be anything special. Just a good mic in front of the darn thing. Really, the magic comes down to how it's hitting all of the outboard gear. And this is kind of the beginning, in my opinion, of what would define Opeth's contrast. It's kind of like that death metal-y, prog-inspired thing mixed with this kind of neo-folk. And that acoustic guitar tone would exist for many albums to come. One of my favorite bits of Opeth is their acoustic guitars, so I'm happy Bradley highlighted that.
Like, just when you think the song's getting going, it like fucking steps it up again.
There are some pretty gnarly riffs in the More. Really, really great song. This album still suffers a bit from the earlier album's problems, which is kind of just mishmashing random stuff together. It's less random on this album, and there's a lot more satisfying moments in general. But I think there's a number of these songs that could stand to lose 2 minutes each.
So that is Still Life. What a fucking jump. From the first three albums to this, absolutely phenomenal. And after that, it gets even better. Can you believe it? So, Blackwater Park. I used to be obsessed, completely obsessed with this song when I was a teenager.
Leper Affinity is an amazing song.
The difference sonically between that and Still Life is crazy. Like, this sounds so much more like polished and like modern.
It is interesting that this does sound more polished, and that this is Steven Wilson who is producing and mixing on this record. For anyone unfamiliar, Steven Wilson, founder of Porcupine Tree, I think leader of Porcupine Tree as well, but also does his own solo stuff and is in my opinion, legendary producer and mixer, especially in the prog rock realm. The marriage of sad boyness between Michael Ackerfeld and then the other side of sad boyness with Steven Wilson was just like a match made in, well, I guess for them, hell. In the metal and prog space, it's one of the most fortuitous collaborations ever. And having said that, I'm actually surprised how much harshness was left in the guitars. I actually made a video pointing out that every single electric guitar has this massive boost. I think it's at 2.2 thousand hertz. It's like really, really sharp and obnoxious across every electric guitar on the entire album. Like, I don't think they captured it that way. That sounds like it was done in post. And if they did capture it that way, I'm wondering how. But as many people have pointed out, I'm fairly certain that's intentional for multiple reasons, but one of which is maintaining the authenticity of Opeth, which is some of it is just really abrasive and obnoxious, and that's actually part of the appeal. I love that they have the jazz bass tone that perfectly matches with the death metal sections and the folk sections. That to me is still mystifying how they can make that match so well. I've only seen Opeth really accomplish it that well.
The riff, man. I call it like the tiptoe riff. It's like really cheeky. It sounds like somebody like tiptoeing down the
It really does, though. It's super cheeky. It's like a Pink Panther, like Scooby-Doo cartoon, but it's like literal demons. Awesome solo.
It's just such a perfectly phrased solo. Like every note is exactly where it needs to be. Then you got
and that goes for so many of Opeth solos on this album, and I would say most of their albums post Blackwater Park is just the solo phrasing is mwah. Bleak. Probably the best song on the album.
I feel like this era is like when they were at their most gothy. Obviously you got Harvest, which is like, you know, the single. You got Drapery Falls.
Drapery Falls is ridiculous. He's about to talk about the soaring melodies over top, which is all this just gnarly ebo stuff going on in the guitars. But man, the magic, the total magic there is not just the layering of all of these obnoxious guitars and these freaking acoustics strumming along with these dense chords. It is the bass line. The bass line is so gnarly on this fretless bass. It's just, oh. I made a whole video talking about that. Go check that out.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful, just like wash of noise with like the melodies like soaring over the top. It's like, oh, it's beautiful.
Yes, wash of noise is a perfect way of describing that. Noisy and obnoxious and harsh, but it also is like beautiful and colorful, sorrowful. There's a lot of sophistication to it.
Let's look at Deliverance first.
So the song Deliverance itself, I think, is way too long. There's some really cool moments in it, especially live. If I can find the footage of it, this was them live right before lockdown, actually. That has to be up there in my top 3 live show experiences. What an absolutely awesome show they put on. But Deliverance definitely took a step backwards in the production and sound design department, and even Opeth admits this. They're not massively in love with how it turned out. And also, it feels like they're trying to almost Death Magnetic themselves, if you will. Death Magnetic was like that hard left turn for Metallica to try and return to their roots. It kind of seems like Opeth was doing that with Deliverance, and there's a lot of people who really liked that. I thought it was middling at best. It's high energy, sure, but the sound design is, again, super duper harsh, and I think the writing is kind of just slapdash. I didn't really catch a ton of great pacing to all of the parts. I don't know, I'm probably in the minority on that, but that's just me.
It's one of like the rare moments in Opeth's discography where they really like channeling just like a straight up through and through like death metal sound, right? Yeah, yes. Deliverance. Cool album. Love to see them embracing more of like that straight up fucking mean death metal energy.
I don't.
This is the album where they really embraced their tender, sorrowful side.
I think Damnation in competition for their best album. It's like, it's a perfect album front to back. It's so beautiful. And I mean, at this time, Opeth had never done anything so ballsy as to do an album that is just like completely low key, no metal whatsoever. And it absolutely dominates. It's such a good album.
It's so gorgeous.
Flawless sound design.
When I show an example
wouldn't
of, like,
change a thing.
Yeah, like here. They're using like a sort of genuine like 70s, I guess it's a Mellotron or something probably, to get those really sort of like analog-y sounds. It sounds so fucking cool.
Again, Steven Wilson production. This is like Michael Ackerfeld and Steven Wilson having the most pure 50-50 baby you could imagine. Hope Leaves.
So much fucking sorrow. Like, the sorrow meter is off the fucking charts on this one.
It is.
Right, then after that,
Absolutely.
we have Ghost Reveries. This, for me, is where their sound just fucking peaked. All the, like, the different influences and, like, a little, like, creative juices and essences.
I think that's a fair assessment. Ghost Reveries isn't my favorite, though the production and the mix was off the chain. Jens Bogren, legendary mixer himself. This is many Opeth fans' favorite album for very good reason. I think you could argue this is also a perfect album front to back.
Everything just fucking came together perfectly on this album. Like, the stars aligned. It's like a dark, dark album, right?
Very dark. Yes!
Definitely has like a heavier overall sound. This album sounds very big.
One of the reasons why it sounds very big is because of all that piercing crap that I was talking about from Still Life, Blackwater Park, and Deliverance. That's gone. 2.2K taking up all of your headroom. Suddenly, you can get the guitars louder. Surprise! I
think what I like about this album has a bit more sort of like variation in sounds. Like, there's a lot of cool different things going on this album.
I'm not sure. I think what Bradley is saying is probably the arrangement and composition gets a little bit more experimental from previous stuff, and that I would agree with. I think that's some more of Mike Lagerfeld injecting some of that Northern European 70s prog stuff into it, which I think also is what makes this album kind of magical, is they took more chances of blending this, again, classic prog sound with a classic death metal sound, and it made something absolutely insanely beautiful.
I don't know how he does it. Like Michael, he can just comes up with just like these amazing, gorgeous melodies. Just like, oh.
Fully agree. Yes, and that's one of the biggest reasons why he is appreciated as a riff writer, is because he writes his riffs as melodies, not just like, this is a thing I can play on guitar very fast. Oh, it feels so good to play. Something feeling good to play is one metric by which you can enjoy a song, but to be honest, that's good for the people playing it. Writing a theme is so important, so incredibly important, and I would say, like, is hands down criminally the worst thing about metal composition across the entire span of its existence. There are some bands that are really good at it. Metallica is amazing at it, but so many of them are so terrible at theming, so horribly bad.
Oh, dude, that chord change. That is it.
I did at least one, if not two, videos on Isolation Years. Isolation Years is such an insanely good song. It's one of those perfect production moments. It's magic captured in a bottle.
The most sorrowful chord change I ever heard in my life. Next up, we have Watershed. Just when you think the band has like reached their peak, they've come out with this absolute classic. This intro.
Well, just when you think the band has reached their peak, well, they did. There's things I really like about Watershed, but it starts getting into that not fully hitting, satisfying nature that we had on like many of the last 4 or 5 albums. This, I would say, is their best metal production ever. The production is massive, it's loud, it's well balanced. It's pretty strongly compressed, more so than their other stuff, but that doesn't bother me, especially just Heir Apparent is so huge, dude. Again, a Jens Bogren produced album. Of course he's run to the fields of sorrow, the sorrow meter. Maybe this is an unpopular opinion. I don't think Coil is that great. I'm glad Bradley enjoys it. It never really connected with me. I always think that Heir Apparent is the first track on the album. The acoustic bits absolutely are delicious, hands down.
Acoustic bit is so good.
Yeah. This boy!
This song is evil, dude.
Burden is outstanding.
That's my favorite one.
Yeah, little boomer bends going on, of course.
Beautiful album, fucking love it. I would say it could have been a contender for like one of the best Opeth albums if like the last 2 songs were a bit stronger.
Honestly, I would say anything after Burden could definitely be much stronger. Even Lotus Eater isn't one of my favorites, but it's decent. The production was so right for that album to be an absolute game changer in metal, and then I just, in my opinion, the writing doesn't stand up.
Gone are the crushing metal guitars, evil riffs, and
Heritage.
blast beat and growls. And instead we have this.
In contention for my least favorite Opeth album. Yeah, and this is a really good example here to rewind Bradley a little bit.
This.
Super
I think maybe a lot of people just
dark.
treat it as like a separate band, as like...
Yeah, some people do. It's just like super dark and wonky and lame. Heritage feels like a very long jam session. Still to this day, can't remember anything off of this album except for the part where Michael Ackerfeld screams "God is dead." That's about it. It's like the musical equivalent of eating unflavored rice paper.
You know, later Opeth and early Opeth is like two different things. So I listened to all 4 of these albums in their entirety. I was completely bored to tears.
All right. This is where I'm gonna have to somewhat disagree, Bradley. We're gonna get into the details, but look, I can understand to a degree, but okay, let's just wait.
Some cool moments here and there in like all 4 albums, but for the
True.
most part, the songs are like so fucking boring, man. My favorite actually was this one.
It has a moment. It's okay.
I've not taken anywhere near enough drugs to be able to appreciate this right now.
Truth.
Where were we? All right, Pale Communion was the next one. Cusp of Eternity. Now, this was a cool song.
Cusp of Eternity is a good track, for sure. It's a great groove to sit in while they have, again, the Ebo guitar over top.
Nice. That's a great little hook. I don't even care that they went back to a more sort of like proggy, stripped down sound and ditched the growls. The main thing I care about is songwriting and just...
I would agree with him, and I would say that the songwriting is a totally fair critique for this era. Initially, I was a little bit saddened that there was no growls and there was no big metal moments, because that's part of the thing that I love about Opeth. But once I finally accepted, yeah, that's just not a thing anymore, and I took it on its own merits, I was like, okay, there's actually quite a bit to enjoy here on some of these albums.
Just like the songs are just mostly just really boring.
As far as Pale Communion, yes, many of the songs on here are quite boring and definitely overwritten and way too long. Fully agree.
Be cool. But it was just like...
That's one of the best tracks on this album. Like, if you're listening to the actual voice leading happening, the voice leading is quite nice. The groove is quite nice. I think it's just the fact that, one, there's no guitars happening right now, and 2, the fact that it's all flutes, and it's like, what the, why flutes? Why? I think with a different arrangement, different timbres, you might feel differently. I could be wrong, but like listening to this whole track front to back is actually really, really delish. Highly would recommend.
That's cool. Nice chord change. Like, a lot of these songs are just like Michael fucking jerking off. I just can't do it.
Okay, that's also fair. One that you absolutely should have played that you completely skipped over, and that makes me the saddest, Bradley. The saddest. My sorrow meter is off the charts because you skipped the song River, which is one of the best on this album, hands down. It is so good. Listen to this 12-string. And then they get these amazing vocal harmonies with this melody on top, and it just builds the whole way through. It gets like a smidge wonky in the bridge, if you can tolerate that, but then the ending is just, oh, dude, it's so good. Bradley, I invite you to reconsider River. And also Goblin. Goblin's a little dorky, but it's cool. It's a nice little jam. Again, you have to pretend it's not Opeth. But Goblin's pretty darn cool, especially the little delay guitar guy. It's kind of cool, and then it's a cool little phrase. It's not like an incredible track, but it's kind of cool. It's got a little attitude to it, a little spunk, little personality. Yeah, like Voice of Treason, way too long, boring. Elysian Woes, I find mostly boring, and it's not even that long. That's pretty, but like doesn't really go anywhere. Moon Above and Sun Below actually has some great moments on it. It makes me sad because it's just way too long, and for many of these moments in the writing to pay off, it really needs something more abrasive in the guitars, in the bass. But the solo on Moon Above, Sun Below is disgusting. I think it's like the 4.5-minute mark. So while I understand on the surface, Bradley being like, this album is super boring, yes, I would agree to a certain extent, but there's actually some really great stuff on this album.
Sorceress!
That describes the entire album right there, just in the bin.
Like sort of psychedelia sort of sound on this one, right?
Yes. This is the one Opeth album that I can't finish listening to because it becomes irritating to have to keep it on. It's a big riff. I'll give it that.
I remember I played this one earlier too.
And it feels really good live. I will give it that. Sorceress live sounds really good.
Because it had like 4 million views. Like, oh, okay, this must be a good one. Sorrow! I mean, this is just like a straight up like folk song, right? The last one, In Calda Venenum. I heard lots of good things about this album when it came out. Universal Truth. I'm sure I remember.
It's still a really, really good album. I initially gave it like a B when it first came out, and as I've kept listening to it, it's moved up to an A. It's not an album that you can just like pick out one song and feel like, oh yeah, that was just like absolutely mind-changing. Like, this is absolutely a front-to-back album experience. The only songs I can think of offhand that get close to like, you can pick it out and just enjoy it on its own. Heart in Hand, which is like, he'll touch on that. Lovelorn Crime, which he did not touch on in this video, and Lovelorn Crime is absolutely beautiful. Or maybe All Things Will Pass. Just a nasty guitar bit. Oh, that nasty, creepy, eerie guitar bit is so good. The whole song is excellent. It's 8.5 minutes. It's a lot. It could probably use a little bit of shortening. I will agree with that. As with most things in Opeth's prog rock era, there could be a lot more editing down instead of just, again, Michael kind of jerking himself off. There's a number of moments like these throughout this album that I think shouldn't go underappreciated. This album, as far as the prog rock albums go, has the most moments. As far as self-contained awesome songs as the piece into themselves, I would say still not quite there, but I don't think that's even the intention. I think it is supposed to be a journey through this wholly sorrowful experience and story. Awesome melodies all over this album.
The heavy production and the heavy guitar, kind of cool.
Yes, thankfully they went heavier on this one.
I like that song. It's all right. It's a lot more engaging than like the stuff off the past 3 albums for me, anyway. Like,
fully agree. Yes. This riff is so good.
Sounds like something off like Deliverance. Pretty sick.
I could see that. Yeah.
But I believe now is the time for the main event. Dust off the old tier list and...
Alright, we're gonna just skip ahead to where he has it done. And he was a little bit more forgiving to their early era stuff, and that's fine. That's just, I would say, a taste difference between Bradley and I. But I would say, outside of our taste differences, we mostly align on a lot of the same stuff without some finer points being juggled around a little bit. So, okay, you passed this one, Beanman. I would just say, give Pale Communion a listen to on those 2 tracks, and give In Count of Venenum a few more spins, and I think you'll appreciate them more. Anyway, subscribe to Night School, I guess, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Later. Bye.